What if I told you Dexter Morgan wasn't just a TV character and the real life version was even more terrifying? Today we're diving deep into a life of a man who became Brazilia's most feared killer, a guy who in many ways lived by a code that felt eerily close to Dexter's. We're going to break down exactly who the real life Dexter is, how his murders actually went down, and whether they were as clean and calculated as Dexter's on the show, or way messier and more chaotic. And honestly, if they were more disturbing, which, you know, they probably were. Pedro Rodrigues was born on October 29th, 1954, on a farm in Santa Rita, Brazil. And his life story, it's violent before it even starts. Like, I mean, really violent. While he was still in the womb, his father kicked his mother in the stomach during an argument, hard enough to bruise Pedro's skull before he was even born. That injury left a permanent dent in his head, which is just wild to think about, that before he even took his first breath, he was already experiencing violence. He grew up in a pretty abusive household where violence was part of just his daily life. Both his father and his mother had tempers, and Pedro was caught in the middle of it. Now, we don't know if the injury to his head was actually a reason that caused him to have violent actions later on, but I would like to, think that it probably is. But either way, it's hard to imagine growing up in that kind of chaos and coming out normal. I don't think he could. By age 13, Pedro says he already felt the urge to kill, and not in some vague, angry kid kind of way. He actually meant it. He was dead serious about this. One day, he borrowed his cousin's horse, without asking, he probably didn't think much of it. He just took it, ran, and just went on a nice horse ride. But his cousin really wasn't happy about this, and once he found Pedro, he punched him in the face twice. After the first punch, Pedro calmly told him, "I'm going to kill you." The second punch, yeah, that really only poured more gasoline on the fire that really didn't need it. Not long after, Pedro tried to follow through with this threat. He shoved his cousin into a sugarcane press, crushing his arm instantly, and here's where it gets truly chilling. Instead of stopping, Pedro grabbed a pair of scissors next to him and started stabbing him in the shoulder, trying to push him further into the machine. Luckily for the cousin, nearby workers heard the struggle and rushed in before Pedro could finish what he started. Now, thankfully, his cousin was sent to emergency pretty quickly, but this was really just the start of the violent life Pedro would soon go through. Years later, Pedro would retell this story with zero remorse at all. In his mind, his cousin deserved it, and that cold matter of fact, he saw violence. This was going to become a very prominent theme in the rest of his life, unfortunately. Pedro was only 14 when his life had changed forever. His dad got accused of stealing food from the high school where he worked as a security guard. Now here's the thing, in their community, being called a thief was worse than a killer. People wouldn't even look at you the same way, and let alone even hire you. And soon the family started to starve because the father just couldn't provide for the family. Now I should mention that the family wasn't poor. They still had income and they were surviving, but this really just hit the nail in the coffin and enraged Pedro, like thoroughly enraged him. And Pedro decided someone was going to pay for this. So he goes on to steal his grandfather's shotgun and hunts down the vice mayor who fired his dad, and then just waits and shoots him dead. That's it. Now here's the insane part. He never actually got caught for this, and later he openly admitted it gave him a sense of satisfaction. That's insane. At 14 years old, I was like playing Fortnite. I'd never hold a gun. I'd never shot a gun, let alone killed someone. And only a month later, he's after another guy, a school guard Pedro believed was the real thief. He casually goes up to the security guard with the gun pointing at him and tells him to go into this sort of locker room. Anyways, he sits him down, and what happens next is insane. He explains exactly how he's going to die and what's going to happen. Imagine being told by a 14-year-old how you are going to die and what's going to happen to you. It kind of sounds similar to Dexter again, open your eyes and look at what you've done. He then shoots him, and after that he covers the body in boxes and sets it on fire. His first real attempt to destroy any evidence with him involved in a crime. This was the sort of birth of his code. Only kill the ones you think deserves to die. After those first two murders, Pedro moved and fled to Sao Paulo. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And this is really the beginning where his life started looking like a warped, bloody Robin Hood story, like a like a sadistic Robin Hood or whatever. He started off being a petty criminal pretty much, breaking into houses and stuff like that, but eventually he decided to change his tactics. Now you see, with this moral code that he had, he decided to only steal from the rich and give back to the poor. He would steal expensive things from these expensive homes, people who were living it, loving life and whatever, and then selling these for a much cheaper price, but still enough to where he could support himself, to people who weren't as fortunate. As if that's somehow noble, I don't know. But on the side of that, he also had a sort of another hobby that he would do. His real obsession was drug dealers. Pedro went after them like it was his full-time job. In his head, he wasn't a criminal. He was a guy cleaning up the streets when the police couldn't or wouldn't. And somehow, in the middle of all this chaos, by stealing from the rich and also killing a bunch of drug dealers, he met a woman. This woman was named Maria Olympia, and she would become a pretty big part of this story. Pretty soon after meeting her, she became his fiancée, and again, soon she was pregnant. Now here's the part that is wild to me. Like when I was researching this, I was like, goddamn. I was like, goddamn, man. Not only was he 14 at this time, at 14 he got this girl engaged and pregnant at 14. But then a devastating day came for Pedro. He came home after a long day of stealing and killing, where he found Maria in bed, dead, shot to death multiple times. And just to make it more just horrible, just to tell you how bad these times were, the killer had written a message on the wall with her blood, and the message said, "We will get you." At this point, Pedro had completely lost it. He spent over a year hunting down anyone he thought might have had even the smallest role in her death, torturing for answers, killing for revenge, following every lead like a bloodhound. Eventually, it led him to a gang member's wedding, and right in front of the bride, the guests, and everyone, he opened fire, 7 dead, injuring a further 16. From that day on, the underworld knew his name. He wasn't Pedro anymore, he was Pedrino Matador, which translated is Little Pedro the Killer. So at 14 years old, he got a girl pregnant, he was engaged, that girl then died with his unborn kid. Then he went on to kill 7 people in a brutal massacre at a wedding and injuring a further 16, and had a nickname like Dexter the Bay Harbor Butcher, but this time it was Little Pedro the Killer. After Maria's murder, Pedro claimed something inside of him snapped, and not in the stop killing kind of way. No, he said he killed for fun. But here's the thing, in his mind, fun still came with rules. He insisted he would only kill the people who deserved it. So at this point, he's known to be some kind of vigilante around the streets, Little Pedro the Killer, and he would only kill the people that rightfully deserved it in his head. And then he added something a little darker to his killings. Before certain killings, he'd say he'd summon the devil, and sometimes he'd drink the victim's blood. I'm not exaggerating, he really told this to people with a straight face. He was just like, yeah, I drink their blood. Yeah, so what? They deserved it. One of his next killings was pretty personal, something close in the family. His favorite cousin's boyfriend had gotten her pregnant, but refused to marry her. And if you don't know, in their culture, that is a no-no. If you get someone pregnant, you are going to marry them, whether you like it or not. Pedro didn't waste time. He tracked him down and just shot him. Dead. I'm not sure how the cousin felt, but yeah, he's just dead. By now, his crimes were making headlines all across Brazil. Everyone knew his name, everyone knew his nickname, and everyone feared him. Pedro's life was never going to be boring. In fact, this next part is even more insane. He started dating twin sisters, and yes, both of them. A romantic relationship with twin sisters. In fact, he actually said he had a threesome with them. So good on you, man. Good on ya. But their father owned a bar, the twin sisters, and from day one, he didn't trust Pedro. Eventually, his fear got the better of him, and one day, when Pedro was at the bar, he tipped the police off that he was there. The result? An absolute bloodbath, mayhem, just bullets flying everywhere. Bottles shattering, people diving behind tables. Pedro was hit multiple times and went down. For him, the world went dark. When he woke up, it wasn't to the sounds of cheering or escape. It was to the cold reality of being chained to a hospital bed, surrounded by police officers and swarmed by reporters snapping photos. His run as Brazil's most feared vigilante was over. Or at least the outside world chapter. The inside chapter was about to get even more bloodier. This is where things really just started for Pedro, which is insane. And at the time of this, he was just 18 years old when he was thrown in jail. Pedro Rodrigues didn't just survive Brazil's prisons, he ruled them in his own twisted way, from the moment he was locked up in 1973. In fact, as Pedro was being escorted to the prison in the back of a van, there was another prisoner being transported at the same time. And for some reason, the guy decided to tell Pedro that he was going to prison because he was a serial rapist. As you can imagine, Pedro decided to grab his chains of the handcuffs and, you know, take him out. And somehow the police didn't hear this, and only when they arrived at the prison, the police opened up the back of the car and saw the man dead on the ground. Now, while Pedro was in prison, Pedro killed at least 47 inmates from reports. These weren't spur-of-the-moment rages of killing either. They were calculated, deliberate, and sometimes he'd sit and share a meal or a story with someone only to later kill them if he learned they had committed crimes he despised, especially against the women or children. So imagine this big guy who you probably know as being an absolute violent criminal coming, sitting down with you, sharing his meal with you, and thinking, hell yeah, I've got a friend, I can trust this dude, only later to be killed by him. But one of the wildest moments from his prison years happened when 5 inmates decided to jump him in a coordinated attack. You'd think he'd be the one getting carted off right back in the morgue, thrown down a chute and just left to die. No, Pedro killed 3 of them on the spot, leaving the other 2 severely injured and walking away without pretty much a scratch, without a drop of blood. And it's really insane that this wasn't even considered unusual for him at this point. Even inside the prison walls, he was still plastered all over newspapers. Every time he killed an inmate, boom, front headline page, Pedro killed another person in prison. And this started to give him more attention over time. So much that in fact he started getting letters from strangers on the outside asking him to kill actual certain inmates. He actually refused most of them, but he would pick certain ones and sort of study these people from afar. If he got a letter about someone who killed a bunch of women or children, he would study them, befriend them, and ask why they were in prison. Once he got the information he needed, he would wait for them to go to their cell and slowly kill them. Now, this wasn't even the start of Pedro's darkest days. The darkest days came when Pedro found out that his mother had been killed in a brutal execution with a machete. So brutal that in fact her body was split into multiple pieces. But this is where it gets insane, absolutely deplorable. He found out that the person who killed his mother was his own father. And even crazier, he was being held in the exact same prison as Pedro. Now, Pedro sat down for a while. He didn't say a single word, he just thought in his head that he was going to swear and get revenge for his mother's killing. So, not long after he found out, Pedro attacked some guards, got their keys, and slowly made his way to where his father was being held. Eventually, in this violent rage, Pedro walked his way to where his father was being held, opened up the door where everyone just looked at him. And everyone knew about Pedro, and everyone knew about Pedro's father as well. So as this was happening, everyone ran away. It was just insane. Everyone just spurred away because people knew that his father was done. Without hesitation, Pedro leapt at his father, and armed with a knife, he stabbed him repeatedly. Every time he stabbed his father, he would yell out the amount of times he did. So 1, 2, 3, and kept going and going until he reached 22 stabs. Now, this isn't where it ends, and I can't say this on YouTube, otherwise my video will be gone, and none of you guys will see this amazing video, which you should like and subscribe. Anyways, I will demonstrate, because I am such a good content creator, with what Pedro had done to his father after stabbing him 22 times. He proceeded to grab the knife, stab it in a certain area of the chest that holds a certain important vital part to living, which he then ripped, you see, ripped, and just ate it. Just took a chomp. I guess he was hungry. He ended up giving his meal to another guy and killed him later anyway, so he was a bit hungry. And that was the end of Pedro's father. Pedro ended up staying 34 years straight in prison, for more than Brazil's legal maximum of 30 years, simply because new sentences kept piling up. By then, prison wasn't just where he lived, it was his kingdom. His cell was like a throne to other inmates, the hallways his hunting grounds. When he finally walked free on April 24th, 2007, he moved to Fortaleza and took a job as a night watchman. Yeah, the same guy who almost had 50 confirmed kills in prison was now quietly watching over a building at nighttime. You know, what a way to change your life. But it didn't last for long. In 2011, Pedro was back in trouble again, arrested for prison-related offenses, rioting, false imprisonment. I don't know if you heard that, but that was my cat feeder. As you can see, my cat's right down there. He was arrested for prison-related offences, rioting, false imprisonment, and inciting violence while he was still inside. He served most of an 8-year sentence and was released again in December of 2018. Here's where it gets surreal. After his release, Pedro didn't just disappear into the quiet. At this point, he was pretty old. I think he was around 60-something. He started a YouTube channel, just like I am, and the channel was called Pedrino X Matador. Literally, Pedro the X Killer. That is an insane name. I love that. That's crazy. And seeing him on camera was bizarre. This was a man who had survived ambushes, massacres, just absolute hell. But now he was calmly telling stories about his childhood, his first killings, the prison bloodbaths, all with this casual, matter-of-fact tone. Some people saw him as a warning to young people. Others saw him as a dark celebrity, and honestly, it's hard to argue, you know, sort of which view people have. But Pedro didn't just tell his stories. He interacted with his audience. People would comment asking him about his code or throw hypotheticals at him. He answered some, skipped others, and always empathized that he only ever targeted people who thought were morally guilty. It's one of those situations where you can't tell if you're watching a redemption arc or just a continuation of a legend. But on March 5th, 2023, Pedro was sitting outside a house in Mogi Das Cruzes, where a car pulled up, masked men stepped out, opened fire, and hit him multiple times. But they didn't stop there. One attacker slashed his neck, nearly decapitating him. And that was it. The man who had survived countless ambushes, 5-on fights, and decades in prison finally fell and took his last breath. Some say it was for revenge on his past murders, others think organized crime was behind it. Either way, the man who lived his entire life behind violence died in a way that almost felt inevitable. Pedro's death might sound like the ending of a TV drama, and in some ways it mirrors one, because there's real comparisons to be made with Dexter Morgan, the fictional killer we all know. On the surface, Dexter's world is clean. He follows a strict code, doesn't get caught, and only kills the guilty. But the truth, he's plagued with guilt, isolated from everyone, and constantly living in fear of being exposed. Pedro, on the other hand, didn't hide. He lived by a code in full view of the world. But that openness earned him decades in prison, endless enemies, and a violent death. It's almost like Pedro's story shows what would actually happen if someone like Dexter existed in real life. Pedro Rodrigues' life was violent, tragic, and unforgettable. From a bruised infant to Brazil's most infamous vigilante killer, he left behind a story that forces us to question what justice really means. Dexter Morgan entertains us on TV, but Pedro lived it and paid the ultimate price for his actions.